Hello, everyone. I can only see 4 people on screen, but I guess we have thousands of people listening to us today. So welcome to our mobility webinar. Let me quickly introduce myself so you know who you're dealing with at least as a host. I'm Gabor Schreier. I'm the Chief Creative Officer of Saffron, and I'll be hosting this discussion today about the future of mobility. And this is such a simple topic, so we can deal with it in 45 minutes and solve the world. But to do this in 45 minutes, we have asked 4 brilliant people to join us on this call today, because this is a titanic task and we need to do it together, as everything needs to be done together nowadays in co-creation and collaboration. And we couldn't be less on this call. Let me quickly introduce you to Natalia Ruda, to Nikita Shipov, to Antoine Kassis, and to Haya Verwoord. And I'll ask you guys, please, to introduce yourself with a little bit of detail, what you're doing, where you're calling in from, so that our listeners and the audience out there in the world is aware who they're dealing with. And then we just jump into the topic straight away. So who wants to start?
Woman first.
Okay. Well, my name is Natalia Ruda. I'm joining in from Madrid. I'm actually global head of brand at Cabify, and my role is basically to define, to conduct, and to implement the brand strategy across the different markets where we operate, and of course make sure that we maintain relevant and consistent in all our touch points and all our markets.
Great, I'll go next. My name is Haya Verwoord. I'm joining from The Hague. My role is Vice President EMEA, Europe, Middle East and Africa for Superpedestrian, which basically means I look after our growth and our operations in this region. It's a pleasure to join today.
Fantastic. Thanks. Thank you, Haya. Antoine, why don't you go? Or Nikita?
Okay, yeah, I can go. My name is Nikita, and I'm responsible for brand and creative in Citymobil in Russia. So probably more local market. Actually, with the Saffron, we just released, I can say, the new brand a few months ago. So we're also on a track for some mobility. Nice to meet you all.
Okay, and I'm Antoine Kassis. I'm the CEO of Kurrant, that is a firm specialized in IoT and smart cities with different services, strategy consulting, executive search, and a video platform with the reports about cities and their projects.
Very good. Thank you. So the combination, just for our audience, I think the combination we have here on this panel is quite interesting. We have, if you want, 2 representatives from between Nikita and Natalia, who are actually providers of mobility. We have Haya obviously as well, but you have a specific mobility product itself. Nikita is dealing with a vast country, you know, a big country. Natalia is dealing with Spain and Latin America, which is also, there's a lot of stuff going in there, very different markets. And we have Antoine, who is the visionary, you know, he's looking into the Internet of Things, the future to come with smart cities. And this contrast is something quite interesting we could look at together. As I said before, this is a quite complex topic. There has been said a lot about this, and we will only be able to scratch the surface. But I would like to kick this off very quickly with a simple question. So to all of you, and maybe we just quickly touch on that and then we go to the next. What do you think, what are the mobility trends that you individually see disrupting at the moment the traditional forms of mobility within cities or urban spaces? What are we looking at here? And maybe we just share quick thoughts on this. Natalia, do you want to go first?
Yes, I'll try to be very brief because I'm sure everybody has a lot to bring in. I can say that at the moment, I think that the most disruptive trend is that mobility has no longer got to do with people, not only got to do with people. We have security needs, we have grocery needs, we have different needs that are raising and that are becoming at the top of our priorities. And one of the things that we are studying very in depth at Cabify is exactly that. No, what other forms of mobility and what other needs are arising after the pandemic, and of course. The way that the marketing is moving is very quickly because users are changing the way they move around the city, and that is making the mobility sector completely reinvent themselves. So I would say that for me, the most important trend at the moment, apart from security, which is I think on the top of every sector, and no matter if you're mobility or whatever, it's priority. I would say that the people are not the only thing or the only have got more needs to move around the city than people. No, we have things, we have objects, we have first needs that need to be transported from one place to another. So I think that is and it has to be immediate. That is the other point that I feel is a top trend, and that would be it.
Haya, what do you think? How does that affect you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like the biggest trend that we're seeing right now is that people are moving from owning mobility, from thinking of we're seeing a lot more electric mobility. In North America alone, there were 160 million trips taken on shared mobilities, and 50%, that's in 2019, and 50% of that were made on shared scooters. And scooters were something that was basically unheard of, I think, a few years ago. It's a completely new form of mobility. And I think it can also started a big trend of thinking about, do we actually need to have big cars that are taking one person, you're occupying that space for maybe a few minutes a day, where it's sitting on the streets for 24 hours a day, and you don't need that much space for one person. So I think that led to a big rethinking about what mobility should look like, but also what cities should look like, because there has been a huge rethinking of the infrastructure. And I think that COVID only contributed further to that, because you see a lot of the European cities started looking for, should we enable more cycling lanes? Should we do it fast so we could allow, more people to actually move on bikes or move on scooters? So we are seeing that explosion of pedestrian areas. And I think the trend is really to reclaim the public space, that we shouldn't, the public space is really like for leisure, for us to enjoy, to have more greenery and to be there and to spend time there outside. It's not just for commuting from point A to point B. So I think we're seeing a lot of new forms of mobility, a lot more shared, a lot more electric, but also thinking of mobility as something that is on demand, that you will get it when you need it, rather than as something that has to be always at your doorstep waiting for you and underutilized. I'll leave it at that.
I think I would really like to be interested to get your point of view on this, Antoine, because Haya just said it's bringing back people to the city, something like that. Giving space to the people instead of having a car using 8 square meters for nothing during just most of the day. How does the future react on that? What do you think? Comes from your point of view here?
If you want, I would give a bit more perspective from the cities or infrastructure side, provider of mobility. Clearly, there is 3 things that if cities and provider of mobility don't go into, in 10 years, they don't exist anymore. Electrification. This is the first thing that is changing mobility. Whether you're on a bike, on a road, on a car, on a scooter, everything is electrified. When we talk about electrification, what does it mean? It means that we need a grid. We don't need only power generation. We need a grid that can handle, vehicle charging all over the city, and even bikes and other lighter, I would say, type of mobility. Then we have the automatization and autonomy. Car sharing company will not be able to be totally profitable, will not be sustainable if there is not a bit of automatization that is introduced. And with autonomous car, it doesn't need full autonomy, but there will be a bit of automatization. As per today, if you have a scooter company, basically people, we call them the juicer. They go every night, they charge the scooters. How sustainable is this model? I don't think it is sustainable on the long term. So we need to automatize all the processes. And this also is a know-how process that will differentiate mobility provider from one from another. And the third thing is connectivity. And to also be able to connect all these tools and all these devices, we will need also to improve infrastructure. So the question is, we have private players, we have a demand first, citizens who are asking for more mobility choices. We have mobility providers who are modern, I would say, who are new, who are young, who are dynamic, like companies that we have here around the table, who will push quickly. But then we have cities, infrastructure, government that is not going at the same pace. And the question, will cities and government keep the pace, and utilities also? This is a very important question. I can share personally, and we'll stop here, my personal experience. I was living in Barcelona. We had a lot of questions about the city, and really the point where we said we're leaving is when they didn't allow any more Cabify and Uber and all these things. When we felt, okay, we're going 10 years back, I'm not going to live in the city. Boom, we left, we are living now in Lisbon. So this type of services and mobility can change the choice of where you're living.
That's quite interesting, especially in the role of the local governments. We're going to touch on that later, but let's listen quickly to Nikita and what you think about the main disruption you're facing.
Actually, the main probably the possibility we're now facing that people, ordinary people, start to understand what mobility means, because it was a concept for specialists or for ourselves. We use mobility, but if you talk to someone and say mobility, for them it will be something very strange. And now when people face that they can deliver something due pandemic with delivery, or they can use electric bike or scooter, they now understand there is no bus or there is no car, but actually options that you can use to achieve your final destination. And actually the concept itself start to arise. And what we see is that we actually can talk about it. We can talk with our consumers about mobility, and now they start to understand that actually there are different options. And it's very interesting that actually in Russia, mobility started to work as an industry probably a year or a year and a half ago, when people actually understood that they can use different options.
Nikita, I'd like to ask you very quickly about the connection of your brand, Citymobil, to social media, because your brand, your company belongs to Mail.ru Group, which is also the owner of VK, which is the Russian sort of biggest social network. And how do you think, talking about experience and talking about social connections and how that changes, what do you think makes your brand special in this system? How do you benefit from that?
Actually, it's more of a question about probably cross integrations, because what we see with our social network and our sub-brand actually in the social networks, that people have different patterns and different values when they use something inside of a different platform. And it transmits not only for social networks, it's also can work with a messenger, with a bank, or something else. And what we see is a way of possibilities to construct your mobility product differently according to the partner you are making this new product. And for a social network mobility platform, for example, we are more using options and features that actually based around social groups, for example, that you can split your check with your friends, or you can see where other people are going with a taxi, and such kind of features and integration give you more opportunity to talk with different and localized audiences more relatively.
Looking at Haya here, my question would be picking up on mobility again and think about scooters, and especially thinking about an experience, because obviously Nikita and Natalia, they also have cars and shared mobility, and you have a scooter, you know. So how do you ensure a great experience for your brand, and what do you think are sort of the moments of truth where you need to really perform, and how do you ensure that this is delivered across the touch points?
Great, thanks. Great question, Gabor. I mean, I think at the end of the day, if I have to kind of summarize what the experience of riders want to be in one word, I would say I want it to be reliable. Like, I want it to be reliable because I think that embeds a lot of things. It has to be safe, it has to be there, it has to be affordable, and they need to be able to rely that, you know, this is going to get them from point A to point B in a safe, environmentally sustainable way. And in order to achieve that, it starts, I think the beginning point is really the vehicle. That's why we've invested more than 75 million in R&D to create a vehicle that actually can check itself continuously to make sure it's always safe to ride and it has no mechanical or electric failure. I say this is the beginning because that's the minimum that I think riders deserve, to know that the vehicle that they use, you know, despite having been in the shared and the public right of way, is actually, you know, ready for them, is safe to use, and they can really rely on it. The next thing is really for it to be kind of affordable, because that's really important. They need to be able to pay for it, afford it, and it has to be accessible for a lot of different people. So I think it's important that, like, for example, if we take shared e-scooters, that it's not only in the center of the city, that it's actually in places where commuters need it as well. And of course, you know, for that, you need a lot of collaboration with the city, so you could, you know, decide on numbers of deployments, areas of deployments, etc. So for me, it's really about that safety of experience, is about the affordability, and it's about the quality. Like, we spent a lot of years in R&D to make sure that that ride is smooth. When you ride a vehicle, it's not feeling like a toy, or it's not breaking, or it's not having any of those issues, that it's actually really nice rider experience, that you can be on it for quite long. And I think the next level is really integration with other modes of transport, which is something that's, like, you know, really high on my mind, because you want to make sure that they could choose which, you know, how they want to do their journey, and that you're able to integrate, whether it is with public transport or with trains, or, you know, with whatever it is, so that you could really, you know, the next level is integration with the community. So we're relatively new, I would say, in Europe. We've been around for a year, but we've invested a lot in community relationship and in understanding, you know, what the local communities want, and being, you know, really part of it, because I think that's a big part of the brand. You're not just offering a service, you're not just there to have some scooters, you also want to be part of that community. I mean, for example, in the US, we don't use gig labor. So I think someone referred to gig and juicers. We don't believe in that. We prefer to actually hire our employees and contribute to employment. That's for us is really important. Also, things like that are more subtle, like doing safety events, doing training, giving away helmets, or this year, like last week, the most recent example, participating in Pride, not just like changing your logo color, but also identifying some, you know, networks in the LGBT community that you can donate to, like having real contribution. So I want, at the end of the day, that the Superpedestrian brand is really real, it's delivering on its promises, and it's reliable. It's a brand that people trust and think of as, like, you know, when I want to get from point A to point B, I would love if there's a Superpedestrian. One of the vehicles that they provide, our scooter, is called Link. I would love if there's a Link in the area, or in the future, whatever vehicle we come up with, that is actually there, and that they trust that it's there to get them safely to where they need to be.
And Haya, are you envisioning at some point a moment where you go beyond scooters, or are you guys thinking about other things, of other ways of mobility? I don't know, hoverboards or something like that, or what's next for you?
Not hoverboards, I think. I mean, yes, we are working on a few other mobility modes to add to our portfolio. I mean, if you just to kind of go back a bit, Superpedestrian started 7 years ago, and our first product was called Copenhagen Wheel, which is an electric wheel that turns any bike into an electric bike. We're looking for ways to also bring that product back, and there are other products that are currently in the pipeline. So it's not just about shared e-scooters; it's more about providing safe transport. That's why the big investment is in the what we call vehicle intelligence safety and system, and that is a system that is embedded into any vehicle that we have, which does those, you know, health checks and makes sure that the vehicle is safe to ride. And so I definitely think the scooters are just the beginning, and that there are going to be a lot more modes of transport. One point I want to make also about the brand, what I think is really important is not just the perception of riders, but also the perception of the broader community. Because I think one of the criticism about shared transport, scooters, bike, whatever, is that there were, laying around there, not organized in the public right of way, which I think is really important to care about that part, and not just about our riders. That's why for me is like we invested a lot in parking technology to make sure that we can actually keep the public space organized and can still provide this very popular and nice and fun and great form of transport without being with actually addressing the issues that are quite valid from the rest of the community, because you want to be, not creating problem. You want to be solving a transport problem, but without creating one. So I think that's also very important when we think about our brand. And one comment I want to make is the name Superpedestrian. Maybe I get a lot of comments on that. We call the company Superpedestrians because we wanted to create more pedestrian-friendly cities, which I think is a really important goal. And it's really important that we find ways to, let that kind of come across in the way that we do things. Because I do believe that like the future, we need to have cities that are more revolving around pedestrians rather than around modes of transport. The modes of transport are only there to like service us, I think.
So, at Saffron, we always say that the brand is a promise of an experience delivered. So in your case, your name is even, if you want your purpose and all in one go, that's actually quite efficient. Talking about experience, I think it's an interesting observation that I personally made, and everyone else who is pre-pandemic. I mean, we were traveling a lot pre-pandemic. I haven't been traveling a lot lately, but I was obviously a heavy user of Cabify, and I was always amazed about the consistency of the experience, starting with the same questions about the water, the this, the that, the temperature, and what have you. I wanted to ask Natalia, how do you achieve that you get to this degree of consistency and coherence across your whole product portfolio, and how do you ensure that this is actually maintained throughout the experience? How do you do that? How do you make that happen?
It's very interesting. I want to explain a little bit about how the business model of Cabify works in Spain, because it's very interesting what you've been talking before. Just to mention, I work in two markets that are very different and have a different state of maturity. As the one mentioned by Antoine, Latin America is in a different moment at all. I mean, the majority of the market is not ready, not even near to be ready to achieve electrification of mobility. So it is a very important trend to which we look to, but we have to divide a lot the markets in which we work. No? So talking about what you're talking about, Gabor, about experience, it's important to understand how we work in terms of what we are, no? Because we are an app that connects, we were an app that connected drivers with riders. That's the essence. We were born as a result of the digital transformation of the world, trying to bring different ways of moving around the city. The digitalization for us was the key of the factor, no? Trying to bring technology to the market and to the needs, no? To meet user needs. No? So it's true that here in Spain, the way we work is we do not own the cars. We do not own the different types of mobility. We are working on evolving certain parts of the different ways of mobility around the cities in Spain, because as I'm saying, Spain and LATAM is very different. So one of the key things here, and it's a double effort, which is very interesting for your question, is here in Spain, we are not owners of the cars. Let's talk about the VTCs or the VTCs that are what we know as ride hailing or P2P, which is vehicle, a car with a driver, right? And we do not own them. So we work with fleets that then work with drivers. So we do have a model of work where we train the fleets. We try to help and give advice on how to give a better service. But it's one of the main keys to differentiate ourselves from what at the origin was the taxi service. So we were working on an industry that was very, very, very basic, had not reached any moment of going through any change, of evolving, of anything. So the first time we come into the market, we had a very, very positive position because we had everything to bring in. We had technology, we had different ways of personalizing our service, like water, like Wi-Fi at cars, everything. So We do work on a very, very important part of the work we do at Cabify is operation focused. So it is true that to maintain that consistency that you received, Gabor, as a user, it's very hard because we don't work directly with the end game, which is the driver. We work across the fleet and then work across the driver, no? And it's very important because at the moment we are perceived as a P2P service, which is a driver with a car, but we are trying to move and to make sure that our platform becomes an ecosystem of mobility in the cities and move out only of being offering cars, and also making sure that we go for our mission, that is making cities better places to live, of course, through technology. And of course, electrification is on our aim. But something that is very important for us to bring up that I just wanted to answer for what Antoine also said before is that for us, it's very important to make sure that we become an ally of the private vehicle, because in order to change a habit, we need to go step by step. So the first thing is, we are an option of mobility to become an alternative, to become the substitute, and then to make sure that there are no more private vehicles in the future. I don't know if it's going to be 10 years, 5 years, 4 years, but the truth is that we want to offer different waves of mobility and always maintaining that consistency in the experience throughout all the different ways of mobility that we offer. So it's a little bit of how we work internally, but we are very operations based. That is very true.
And this is maybe, Nikita, you want to quickly react on that, because the way Citymobil works is slightly different, and you have also a different choice of mobility options. Do you want to quickly elaborate a bit on that to see the contrast?
Actually, it's still going the same route, probably as a Cabify going. So I believe it's still a question of how to provide a better service. So you can make it in a different way. In Russia, I believe our service level is still differs a lot from Spain, and probably it's more similar for America than to Europe. But what we're trying to do, we actually try to build ecosystem around drivers and to provide different tools to them to understand how to earn more, how to provide better service. So it's also a question how you make not only rides better for riders actually, and how to provide a good service for them, and also how to build a process when drivers also expect a good ride and understand how to get it.
And going back now quickly to the question that was teased by you, Haya, about the way cities and urban spaces are being disrupted or were disrupted at some point by all these mobility providers, whether we had scooters or suddenly have had a lot of shared cars using a lot of parking space in the city. How, and this is more a question maybe to start with Antoine, and then you all chip in. How would a municipality, a city benefit from, or how they're benefiting right now from you, and what are the challenges that you are encountering working with municipalities or public entities, just to make sure that all these mobility providers fit in the same space, because there's only so much space and there's only so much market. So how does that affect maybe the smart city in the future? Maybe Antoine, you want to elaborate a bit on that, and then you all just will chip in.
Yeah, if you want, again, the problem is question of speed. Unfortunately, cities will not keep up with the speed of the private sector. Well, for sure, they will not keep up with the demand, because now, because of digitalization, people have ideas. Now, I think before, even cities have had time to deploy Wi-Fi, for instance. Everybody wanted to be connected already, and people would just pay their telco for a monthly membership and get. They will not wait for the city to deploy Wi-Fi in all the cities. But we can say that some cities have tried. If you want, the first shared mobility, and that was a very good example of branding, was the city of Paris with the Velib. So the first bike sharing was a city initiative in partnership with the private sector, but it was a city initiative. And the brand was an exclusive Parisian brand. So when you say Velib, it's only used by the city. At the opposite now, now that you have all these companies coming with, with different speed, different ideas, the cities are not even owning the brand anymore. So you don't have any more cases where you have a car sharing system or that is branded under the city. So this has two advantage and disadvantage. Is once you own the brand, you own the risks that come with the brand. Now this risk is more carried by the mobility providers. Having said this, the cities are responsible for accidents. Because we're talking about pedestrian, super pedestrian. I'm just raising this point. One of the main risks of that is at least raised of scooters is a risk on pedestrian. So it's quite funny that, and I think you must have a real challenge in terms of branding, because super pedestrian, while actually what the people are raising as a problem is, wait, we have accidents of pedestrians being hit by scooters. So I think there is something interesting to work on that in terms of branding. But cities have to control their space. And again, we're coming back, they have to provide power, because Cabify or super pedestrian, or you cannot yourself have a grid and have your energy. So they have to provide user infrastructure, and they have to control, so they have to connect. For instance, Natalia was talking about replacing the private owned company, car. One of the things is today, when you're going to go from place to point A to point B in a city, Google Map will tell you it takes 15 minutes. It doesn't tell you that you need 15 minutes to find a parking spot. So actually it takes 30 minutes. So you better call Cabify or go on scooter or take the public transport. And this information is only the city who can provide it. Why? Because they need to have the sensors deployed, they need to get info from different, and so there is a consolidation of data that has to be done and then redistributed to the different mobility players. So there is two trends that are happening at the moment. Is the first thing is that cities are understanding that they cannot work alone anymore, that they need to work with the private sector. The other trend that you are seeing is that cities are hiring in the private sector. So now, for everything that is around smart cities, we see more and more cities hiring people coming from the private sector, because they understand that, unfortunately, their own staff don't understand the technology, are not quick enough in this, and so they need new brains coming in. And this, I think, will be also a trend that will accelerate how cities will deal with this. Unfortunately, we will always have the public tender process, preliminary studies, the public tender, and then you have 5 companies like Cabify that are already on the market and they are still doing their studies. So there will always be a difference in speed, unfortunately, with city. And this is a role and a responsibility that private companies, like the 3 that you're having here, have, because you are becoming a public service, actually.
What do you think? What do you guys think about this?
I would like to add something and ask you a question, Antoine. I think it's very interesting, but I was thinking it the other way around in terms of how private companies can help the public sector and can help cities move towards technology, move towards sharing information, because it's true that the cities are, or at least here in Spain and even more in Latin America, but here in Spain, governments are not ready to have the infrastructure that we create as an app or as a technological company, right? So that is one of the things that we're trying to work very hard on, trying to be ourselves allies of the governments, of the cities, and making sure we can share all the information we have, which is huge. We have loads of mobility trends. We know where the people are moving. We know where they go. We know how much time they move, the different ways. No, so it is true that I was thinking more the other way around. I was thinking more that it's the cities that need the private companies to make sure they provide technology that can help the cities be better places to live. And this is one of the things that I was thinking, that we have a lot to give to the cities. So when we have situations like the ones we have in Spain, I don't want to get into political issues around why Cabify and Uber yes, or why Cabify and Uber no, but it is true that we have it very difficult to grow because there is a legal part, there is a very important lobby around the taxi, but it is true that if we think it the other way around, what good things we can come or we can bring to the cities in terms of technology, of traffic management even, because we are trying to tell the cities that we can offer different ways, we can offer different combinations, we can even make people go in the same cars. Technology can do everything. So at the end of the day, if we are smart, we can help the cities be smart also, no? True. So I was thinking more of that side. Don't know what you think about that.
Totally true. However, if you want the point that you can push the city, but there is basic infrastructure that you will never be able to deal with, except if you take a model a bit like, you know, for instance, infrastructure company, highways, telcos. They start with infrastructure, then they start to provide service. You're coming from the service. You have ability to raise a lot of funds because the company have ability to raise funds. So one model could be that actually you create sister companies that are infrastructure companies who go into PPPs, private-public partnerships, to build this infrastructure. Of course, this is two totally different model that will need to have two types of investors because it's not the same cycle. But if you can push them, but unfortunately to build infrastructure, it will take the time it takes, except if private companies, by investing in the PPP model, can accelerate this. We are seeing it typically in street lighting, for instance, that is a way a bit linked to mobility. Cities were very slow in replacing their luminaires, for instance, and making them smart, while actually they are getting energy savings from them, and so this is less taxes for their citizens and more safety for the citizen. Once players understood that, look, it will take a lot of time, big energy group came in and started to invest in a PPP model to do the replacement, and then the city can pay on 15, 20 years this investment, and then it accelerates this. However, today, you will not be able, in your configuration, as you are today, typically to help a city to have a better grid, a better connected grid, to provide electricity, to build pavements, so all these things will need an infrastructure player who can help them, but this can be also a sister company to your company with a different business model.
I just wanted to add up, because probably the question of integration of public service and public transport to our system is also one of the next challenges. But what we see now, in Moscow especially, probably because it's the largest city and they have the technology behind, that local governments they want to create marketplace of marketplaces. So they come to you to give you, for example, the traffic information or something, but at the same time, they took your information and actually they take, for example, Uber, Citymobil, and other competitors and create their own marketplace with all the mobility platforms that actually kind of make you less competitive, because they have an option to convince everybody. So if you don't play with them, you're already a loser. But if you play with them, you actually can lose your business also, because they can make their own marketplace just using your marketplace as a piece. And that's something that we see now evolving in Moscow. And actually we work in a great partnership because we can help each other to make cities better. But it's interesting that when you start to see city as a partner, at the same time, he can evolve into the competitor.
Okay, so I think a couple of things. Like, I think the biggest challenge we're putting today is a challenge where we're saying the cities of the past are not going to be the cities of the future. So just because things worked a certain way in the past doesn't mean how they're going to work in the future. And that is always a little bit challenging when it comes to, cities and public administration, because to Antoine's point, they move at a little bit of a slower pace than the private sector. Where I think we can help is a few things. I mean, to Natalia's point, data sharing, and helping them understand what is the current demand. Like, a city will think about it very different if you say there are actually 50,000 or 100,000 rides happening a day with this specific modes of transport. And these are the areas where the infrastructure is struggling a little bit, because these are the areas where there aren't any bike lane. What can we do together? Is it really just like either a bike lane or not? I think there are ways in between. We can maybe, if this is a 50-kilometer street, we can reduce it to 30-kilometer street, where bikes, scooters, mopeds, and cars can actually coexist. There are ways to rethink about it in a creative way. And I think, that type of conversation where it's actually honest and pragmatic, and just, private operators being super open about sharing data and advising the cities in some case on how to best develop infrastructure, what could be a short-term solution, what could be a medium-term solution, what is a, kind of supported by data. I find it as very effective because, if the demand is there, if people are using it already, you're already making the use case. In a lot of those cases, we didn't wait for infrastructure to happen. People just put it on the ground and, they're using it. And that helps politicians to actually make the case and invest and take the time. So a lot of collaboration is needed, but I am seeing a lot more willingness from cities to learn about the technology, to understand the data, to have those conversations, to have like honest conversations about those issues. I think that the biggest challenge is just basically having those honest discussions and being honest about what's doable and what's not. Like, for example, Antoine raised a very important point about pedestrian areas. We can geofence all pedestrian areas in a city. We have the technological capability, which I think no one else in the sector has. We could do that, but we need to tell riders where they can ride. I can't just geofence an area and leave them nowhere, stopping in the middle of the road, right? I need to have an honest conversation saying, I can geofence this, but I'm not gonna lie to you. I need you to give me a place where riders can actually ride, so I can let them have a continued journey from point A to point B. And I think also another challenge with cities is that they are not always having the level of people and consumer focus that private operators have, because of course we always think about our consumer, we think about people. And there's also a lot of education to do in terms of like saying, these are the riders, this is the community, these are some of the issues. They think about sometimes the complaints, but not about the riders and the users. And I think this is a role that we can really play. And for me, data is at the center of that, and being like just pragmatic and having that collaboration. And I think I'm seeing it in a lot of more places where we can really rethink our public space and come up with ways to shape, and build infrastructure that could combine all those new modes of transport. The whole idea of this whole innovation is to give space back to people, not to take from people. So we're gonna put scooters, but these are not new rides. These are rides that are taken from cars or from other modes of transport. At the end of the day, people are today living in more smaller communities. We hear about the 15-minute city, right? You want to not commute as long. A lot more people are working from home. So we should be able to reclaim our public space. And I think that, the idea is not to take more with more modes of transport, but to actually be more efficient and give more space to build, trees and parks and have the kids play and enjoy. So that's my view on it.
I just wanted to quickly encourage our audience to ping us questions. I forgot to say that at the very beginning, so I'm sorry for that. Whenever you have a question to our excellent panelists, just let us know. We will be happy to answer them in some minutes. I personally have a question to all of you in regards of the future of mobility in general regarding autonomous driving. So all of us who have been to California at some point, we at Saffron have been working there. We're still working there for great brands. The thing is, we are exposed sometimes to this future that the rest of the world are not seeing happening in the same pace. When do you think, or what do you think will be the relevance of autonomous transportation for brands like you, Natalia, Cabify, or obviously you, Nikita? And also, I don't know if there's going to be an autonomous scooter, Haya. I would be really interested in knowing if that's something you're considering, or is this something that's just something for the German Autobahn or some place where you have no obstacles like you have them in a very crowded urban space. I'm sure that our audience would be interested in that. What's your point of view on that?
You want to go, Nikita? I've been speaking for a while.
Yeah, actually I can, and probably because we're also working on this technology, and actually Russia, one of the main leaders for self-driving, because we have Yandex, who is working hard on self-driving and make great progress. We have a whole city that is actually now operates with self-driving cars. We have a Moscow locally restricted area where you can see like every fifth car is actually autonomous, and it's amazing to see it. But we all understand that it will happen probably in 5 or 10 years. It will be a long process because of the regulation, because of all around this legal things. But The next big question for us, because we understand that it will happen at some point, what to do with drivers, because ethically, it's a big question, because drivers were actually the people who made this ride-hailing happen. We understand that we need to make the transition to the self-driving very easy for them. We need to understand what will happen with all these people and how this community will be affected by integration of these new forms of mobility. And it's something that we're still trying to understand, because there is no easy question or answer to how it will happen.
Well, from the Cabify side, we are not investing in technology to investigate around autonomous vehicles. If we grow to that area, of course, because if we want to be this ecosystem which offers different types of mobility around the city, it would be with a partnership. It's not our core, absolutely not. And for us, it's very important to bring focus to what we are doing at the moment. We have a long way to go. Our markets are very far away from these moments. We focus on security, and it's one of our main areas of differentiation. I can say that security both in the health side and security in Latin America in the way we move around the cities is fundamental. So I guess at the moment it would not be an option for us until it is more consolidated. And of course, if we incorporate it to our mobility ecosystem, it would be through a partnership. And well, at the moment, or at least at the moment, this is part of the strategy we have, no? So what we're trying to focus is where we are on the core of our business. Sometimes we feel that investigating is very interesting, but sometimes it makes us move around and not put all the energy and all the efforts on what we're doing. So we think that all the development of the automatization of mobility is for another player, definitely.
Gabor, just to answer your question about autonomous scooters. So our vehicle already has autonomous technology in it. We have something called autonomous maintenance, which is basically the vehicle intelligence system I mentioned, does self-check, but it can also take corrective actions. It can take up to 140 actions, where, for example, if it's thrown into a river, which sometimes happens for reasons beyond me, it self-protects, and it takes actions to actually protect the battery and protect itself, and it sends notifications so that the team can go and fish for it.
Get me out of here. Get me out of here. Something like this, no?
Before it's deep, exactly. If it flips on its side, which sometimes also happens, it would send a notification to the maintenance team, says, come pick me up. It doesn't pick itself up and go somewhere. Can it pick itself and go somewhere? If there's infrastructure, I mean, I think that technologically it's probably possible, but the issue is that you would need to think about infrastructure space for those, scooters moving around to go park themselves, which is another challenge. And I think that's also a challenge for, autonomous vehicles in general, is adding another layer of complexity to the infrastructure in cities, which I think, is definitely coming, but we'll have to also do some more rethinking of the space. We also do a lot of geofencing. I don't know if you're familiar with the terminology, but where you could geofence certain areas, so it reduces speed by itself. So it is taking smart autonomous actions without the riders.
That's good to know. I'm sure that the self-protecting capabilities of a scooter, most of our audience wasn't aware of. That's brilliant. Antoine, do you have a reaction on that in terms of when will be the cities ready for autonomous services? Will that ever happen?
But if you want today, it's a bit like the chicken and the egg also, because cities are not willing to invest in what we call roadside units, typically to be able to communicate with vehicles, because there is not enough vehicles that are autonomous and equipped with an onboard unit. So in Europe, typically, as per today, we estimate that there is around 0.5% of vehicles that are connected, so that could go into what we call V2X, V2E, V2I, autonomous vehicles. So the question is, I think that actually the private mobility provider who can just convert a fleet very quickly, at the opposite of individual owner who will even an owner of a scooter will not just change his scooter quickly. So there is a cycle for the renewal of this. So for cars, for instance, in Europe, we expect that before 2040, we will not have more than 50% of the vehicle connected. This is by the natural, replacement of vehicle. However, if you are a car sharing provider, this is something because they change vehicle very much more often, and this is an investment that can be done. So here again, you would be a leader in pushing actually the market. And once you push and you show cities that there is actually the demand for autonomous vehicle and you have already connected vehicles, then they are ready to connect, to deploy the infrastructure. For instance, in Belgium now, they are equipping the highways with roadside units. However, they are not using the V2X protocols. They are using Bluetooth because the vehicles are not connected. So basically, they try to connect to your phone just to count vehicles and to do very basic things. Sometimes also modify the lighting level. But so they are obliged to add Bluetooth to roadside unit just because there is not enough connected vehicle today. So again, chicken and egg. But I think that the role of car sharing, scooter, and all the new mobility provider can be, can catalyze actually and accelerate the deployment of autonomous cars. And I was actually very disappointed when I heard that Uber stopped their investment in autonomous car. For me, this was what would differentiate actually the player, because otherwise it becomes a question of price, because at one point everybody will be able to provide the same level of service. The technology in terms of software will be, there is no big barrier, entry barrier. And so I think, I mean, this would be my advice, but after, of course, Cabify, you know your model better than me. I think investigating at least and having a very close partnership on these technologies is very important, because this is what will make a difference. And this is what will enable to reduce costs. Because the problem is that the price, you will not be able to increase it. Actually, it's only going down, is actually optimizing the cost. But I'm not at all an expert in this mobility. I'm more of an infrastructure. So it's just, don't take it as an expert opinion.
Talking quickly about infrastructure, we have a question here. Someone's asking, what about green energy as a source for e-mobility? Which obviously is a question for the authorities, but also for you. How do you deal with e-mobility? I mean, some of you already do that, but Nikita, Haya, and also all of you. What is your? How do you deal with that? Green energy sources.
I won't be surprised if in Russia self-driving will be before electric mobility, because we're also becoming aware of all the ecological and so on, but we have no infrastructure for that. And I can see that coming probably in the future, like 5 or 10 years, but the progress on self-driving and the integration between public service and commercial companies even more evident than transition to electric. But it's totally local and cultural thing. We see that scooters are good because they're electrical, but no one picks up the scooters because they're ecological in Russia.
Any other comment on green energy? Is this something you care about?
Definitely. I mean, otherwise, what are we doing, right? If we're talking about sustainable transport and we're not looking into green energy, I think definitely it's something that we're actually looking into very actively, especially in terms of sourcing energy in our warehouses across the world, wherever it's doable to actually source them from green energy, which is doable in a lot of countries, not everywhere. But I hope that we can, achieve transitioning to sourcing only from green energy in the next couple of years. So I think that's super important. The other thing is really around, life cycle of vehicles. That was like really on the focus of our engineering team, is to create vehicles with longer life cycle that also have batteries that last for really long. Our battery lasts for up to 22 days actually on the streets without a charge, depending on how much it's used. Usually it lasts less because it's used more often. But that is really important, because if you're not charging as often, and if the battery is lasting longer and is also having a longer life cycle, that all has impact on your footprint. I do think there, you know, in Europe, the consumers are also more aware of the choices they make, and they choose for companies that take those type of actions. They're quite knowledgeable. They're quite they think about you know, their choices and their impact from everything. I mean, we see it in food, in clothing, in transport as well. So I think it's definitely a very, very important topic.
That's a very nice link to maybe the last question on the call to all of you, which is, how do you use the power of brand to be different, to stay relevant, and to be different, and I mean, stay relevant and authentic more than anything, the way we at Saffron describe a brand, in order to really make sure that you're still in the business in some years from now, knowing that there's a lot of competition going on. How do you do that? What's your point of view as a last sort of comment?
I think being authentic is what's most important. Like being honest. If we, you know, for example, like we care about the environment, then we shouldn't scrap scooters. Like consumers are not stupid, so they're smart. And it's really, really important that we live to our values, because it's very easy for a company to create values and to create a brand, but it's much more difficult to actually live to those values when economic decisions are involved. So I think that just in general, like the leadership of the company and everyone that is involved in decision making, to be just authentic to why I'm doing this, why am I working in this company. Of course, we're all for-profit companies. We want to make money as well. We want to satisfy our investors, but sometimes having hard conversations where you say, no, sorry, I'm not going to do this because it stands against of what we stand for. I think this is the most, you know, the most important. And I think you build a brand over time. It takes years to build a brand. You know, I started building like the Superpedestrian brand in Europe a year ago, and it's still like very early on. But I think it takes 10, 15 years to build a brand. But as long as you really are clear on what are your values, that you live to them both internally and externally, so both within your employees and externally with your consumers, with cities, and you're honest to who you are, I think that's what really creates a strong brand that is recognizable and that people love.
I would like to add that we have an extra challenge as challenger brands that I think we are, is that we need to build trust because our sector is not known. I mean, when we began, or when Uber began with all this mobility revolution, they had to define and to make people understand what ride hailing meant. So there is an important thing that we have to do before, is we have to construct around the brand, the concept of our industry. Then we need to associate it with, or create awareness towards our brand, and then create the trust, no? Because if it is true, we compete against, I don't know if it's brands, but we compete against alternatives that have been building their relevance through years, through the whole life, because the public transportation or taxis have been there for ages, right? So for us also, it's very important to build trust and to build relevant messages around, for us, security and sustainability, because I wanted to add that before you were speaking about the energies and about sustainability, and at Cabify we know that we are a player that at the moment has not got there in terms of electrification. It's very difficult to bring all the LATAM system into electrification, but for us it's very important to make sure that at least we compensate. No, so we began in 2018, the first company in the sector to be 100% carbon neutral, because we compensate everything we do. So I think it's also a matter of understanding the market, being relevant to what we do, being, of course, authentic, right, in the sense of what we say and what we do, and in order to make sure that we have an end game, build a plan that always has consistent and coherent messages around all touch points, no, and everything we do internally and externally, of course.
Nikita, the power of brand. Yeah. To add up, because actually a lot of what was said is relevant to us. When we see our brand, we also understand that it must be relevant for everyone else around. So we're talking not only to riders, but we're also talking to the drivers, and we need to understand how this communication will affect them. Or for example, when we start to promote scooters, we need to understand how people who are going around will also perceive this communication, because they don't like the guys on scooters actually. So when you construct a brand, you need to understand how make it relevant to everyone and how to create a place where you can speak to different audiences and convey the same message for all the audiences around.
Antoine.
Yes, I will not talk because we are a small consultancy firm, and I'm not going to talk about our brand. However, I have a question actually to three players. Is that what we see today in terms of branding of the new mobility is always comparing yourself to traditional mobility provider. But the thing is that in every city now we have 2 or 3 typically. In every city we will have Cabify or Uber, Lyft, Bolt. There is so many players. And what we don't see is how do you position yourself compared to the other players? Because now it's not new anymore. Car sharing is not new anymore. It has been now a few years that it's here. So now we have to see how do I choose a brand or another. And where I see the risk in not working very much the positioning compared to other brand is that basically it is the users who will make your brand, like you are not taking an initiative on them. And I think this is something that is important that you are not seeing yet. It's always typically when we open a round table, I'm not criticizing of course, but you always compare yourself to the traditional way. The question is how do you position in the new world and with the other players. The other comment I had, it was more on the green energy, is that today people at home are ready to pay more money for the energy bill if it's a green energy. And I think they will be also ready to pay more for their ride if it's green energy. And so this is something that is very important to take into account. So in terms of infrastructure, it's a huge challenge. Why? Because you're adding more volatile energy supply on the grid. You are adding vehicles who can later also supply the grid, so bring back energy on the grid. So this will be a huge mess. However, I think that today, once all the fleets will be electric, if I know that, okay, in this fleet, I'm going with green energy, or typically I'm going with nuclear or not nuclear, people have position. People are very educated, especially in Europe and the US. And I think that it will be interesting to know on what are these vehicles riding. And so I will make my choice, even maybe to pay a bit more, because I want to encourage this type of energy production.
Antoine, I love your first question because it's a struggle, to be honest, especially because we're very new, right? This is like new forms of mobility. I mean, for scooters, it's a new form of mobility. So if another company leaves scooters parked incorrectly, it doesn't hurt them, it hurts me as well. It hurts us as well. It hurts everyone because there is very little brand differentiation. People look at scooters and don't think like, you know, Superpedestrian or X or Y or Z, they just think scooters. And that is actually, you know, the way it has been until now because it's very new. I think the brand differentiation is starting slowly. It will, you know, pick up. I mean, until today, consumers made their choice based on which scooter is actually closer to them or which one is available, not based on, do I want to ride a Superpedestrian? Is it a better riding experience? They haven't had, maybe they've never experienced a Superpedestrian, like maybe they've never, you know, been on one, etc. So I think that the brand differentiation will start. The way that we do it, in my opinion, is the first point is really focusing on a reliable, safe, great experience. But the second one is doing beyond that, being really engaged in the community, spending more on marketing, you know, doing community events, doing rider education, showing that we are really part of, you know, providing a service and that we care about the communities where we are. You know, it's about our employment practice. It's how we treat our employees. It goes through everything, like everyone that works with us, our suppliers, our employees, the communities where we are. I think that's how you construct it. It is a longer term project. It doesn't happen overnight, but eventually it matters. And we do see, like, from the feedback that we're getting, especially because when I first started this job, it was almost a year ago, a lot of people said, oh, another scooter company, like, how are you going to do this in Europe? It's going to be impossible. And we're seeing that, you know, now we're like in almost 25 cities, people love us, and we see that there is a difference that they see and they love it and they recognize it. It does take time and patience and investment, but I do think that you know, building a brand is not something that you do overnight. It takes commitment. So yeah.
It's hard work more than anything.
Absolutely. And there's also something to add that it is true that we compare to the traditional because we were talking about how we consolidated and become what we want to be, no? But of course we do compare ourselves to our competition, not even to our competitions, but other technological companies that for us are best in class or for us are of course a best practice, right? But it is true that one of the key things I think to differentiate around service, which is very difficult because at the end of the day we are a commodity, we are converting ourselves in a commodity. You move around, the car that is nearer, the scooter that's nearer, the motorbike that's nearer. But it is true that at Cabify, we are trying to develop and move a little bit around from being an operation-based company, which is how startups begin, to be a brand-based organization. And this is what on the process of transformation in which we are. And it begins with having a very, very, very big team of user research where we investigate, we listen to what's going on around in the market. We have a very important global survey, which is based on a brand tracking. It's it's bigger than a brand tracking, but it's based on a brand tracking where we try to find the gap between what users need, and I mean users as the whole majority of users, drivers, riders, everybody, public administrations, everyone. So we listen to what they say, and we compare it to what our strategy is, to try to find the gap in the middle and try to make sure that we are relevant at that point. No, but of course, competition for us is we do benchmark every day, every week. We are always looking at what they do, where they go, where they move. It's super important for us. It's true that we speak more about where we come from, but it doesn't mean that we don't look at the differentiation. But it's a very, very, very big challenge because it's not so easy to differentiate ourselves. And in the case of Cabify, we are trying to consolidate around sustainability as one of the most important pillars of our business strategy. And the sustainability not only meant as green, as being eco, sustainability as being inclusive, making mobility accessible to every type of person in the city, people that are deaf, people that can't see. So everybody has the option of finding a way. So we are developing technology towards I don't know, the older people that it's not so easy for them to move around the city, no? So we're trying to find the way of differentiation, not because we think it's a differentiative way, but because we really believe that mobility has to be for everyone. And it's difficult because, as you say, Haya, building a brand takes a lot. And until we get to see the efforts of what we're doing, I think at least 1 or 2 years will need to come, but we're beginning to see movements on our brand tracking KPIs, yes.
Okay.
But actually, just to add up, I don't see a problem competing with other types of mobility or with the public transport or with something that surrounds people, because even for people, we don't want to be a competitor of another ride-hailing app. We want to be a competitor of any way they use their mobility, how they feel their mobility needs. So we want to compete with ride-hailing, with public transport. We want to be better than, I don't know, going by foot or taking a car sharing. And actually, by doing that, we find new possibilities for our brand, because we understand that, for example, if we are competing with a ride-hailing, we can be better by adding scooters to our app, because we were the first one in Russia who actually combined it. And when another ride-hailing will add scooters, we will add something else. And when we're doing that, we understand that we need to consider needs of our consumer rather than searching for differentiation between two ride-hailings or two modalities.
Okay, the fact that we are almost 10 minutes over the time shows that this is a vast topic, and obviously we could carry on trying to figure out how we solve it. And I'm sure it will be worth to run a second webinar on this topic with all of you. I just there's one thing I really, apart from all the things that we discussed, which I think were quite relevant also for our audience. There's one thing that you said, Nikita, that really stuck with you, which is the ethical responsibility that we have for people who are part of this transition, you know, whether it's the ethical responsibility for the drivers, you know, people who are actually make the service possible, and people who we work with. And that's also something that's very important to build the brand inside the company. You know, that you can only be a powerful brand outside and be perceived as one outside powerfully if you have a powerful brand inside. Without that, you're not authentic, you're not credible, and you won't be differentiating in the long run, because what your employees, your drivers, and your people reflect is what they have in their heart and their emotions. And ideally, if that's you as an employer, because you're a great brand, you've done a fantastic job. I think we have to leave it there for now. I'd like to thank you a lot. I think it has been a very engaging and inspiring discussion. So Natalia, Nikita, Antoine, and Haya, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. I hope to see you soon again. Yeah, and I think we'll leave it here.
Thank you, Gabor.
Thank you very much. Have a great day, and all the best for your individual challenges ahead, being it with municipalities, with competitors, or with the day-to-day of building a brand. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Gabor.
Bye.
Thanks to all. Nice to meet you. Bye-bye.